I never thought I'd be the guy raising 2 kids alone. But here's the thing nobody tells you about abandonment. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn that you don't see coming until you're already drowning. My ex-wife, Sarah, walked out on our family 9 years ago when our son Jake was 6 and our daughter Emma was 4. And she didn't leave because of abuse or infidelity or any of the usual reasons people split up. She left because her yoga friends convinced her she was wasting her youth being tied down to responsibilities. I know how that sounds, like I'm being bitter or exaggerating, but I'm not. Those were literally her words the night she told me she was leaving. We had what I thought was a normal marriage, the kind where both people are tired and stressed but still trying their best. I worked long hours as an automotive technician, and she was a dental hygienist with a part-time schedule that let her be home when the kids got off the bus. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We had family dinners most nights and took the kids to the park on weekends. And sure, we argued about money and whose turn it was to do bath time. But I thought that was just regular married life with young kids. Everything started changing about a year before she left, when Sarah joined this yoga studio downtown and met a woman named Jessica, who became her closest friend practically overnight. Jessica was one of those people who talks constantly about living authentically and finding your true self. She'd done the whole van life thing for 2 years and was always posting pictures of sunsets with captions about freedom and breaking chains. At first, I was happy Sarah had a hobby and friends outside of our routine. I even encouraged her to go to the weekend retreats and the meditation workshops because I figured she needed something for herself. But then the retreats turned into girls' trips to the mountains, and the meditation workshops became excuses to stay out until midnight on weeknights. And suddenly Sarah was spending more time on her phone scrolling through Jessica's Instagram than she was talking to our actual children. I started noticing she'd tense up whenever Jake would ask her to help with homework or Emma wanted her to read a bedtime story. Like their needs were this unbearable weight she couldn't wait to escape. I tried talking to her about it maybe 3 or 4 times, asking if everything was okay or if she needed us to get a babysitter more often so we could have date nights. But she'd just say I wouldn't understand because I wasn't the one who gave up my body and my dreams to have kids. That hurt because I'd never asked her to give up anything. We'd planned this life together, or at least I thought we had. The final straw came during what was supposed to be a family beach vacation in July. We'd rented this little cottage right on the shore for a week, and I was genuinely excited because the kids had been talking about building sandcastles for months. The first 2 days were actually great. We flew a kite and collected shells, and Emma laughed so hard when a wave knocked her over that she couldn't stop giggling. But on the third night after the kids were asleep, Sarah sat me down on the porch and told me she'd been thinking about her life. She said she felt like she was disappearing, like every day she woke up and played this role of mom and wife, but inside she was screaming, and Jessica had helped her realize she didn't have to live like this anymore. I asked her what she meant, and she just looked at me with these empty eyes and said, "I'm leaving, Mark. I can't be their mother right now. I need to find out who I am without all of this." I remember my hands started shaking because this wasn't a conversation about marriage counseling or taking a break. This was her telling me she was abandoning our children. I begged her to think about what this would do to Jake and Emma, how they'd blame themselves and carry that trauma forever. But she just kept saying they'd understand when they were older, that she'd come back when she was ready, that this was temporary. The next morning, she sat the kids down and tried to explain in the gentlest way possible that mommy needed to go on a long trip to figure some things out. And Jake immediately asked, "Did I do something wrong?" with tears already streaming down his face. Emma didn't understand at all. She just wrapped her tiny arms around Sarah's leg and wouldn't let go, sobbing and begging her not to leave. Sarah cried too, but she still packed her bags that afternoon while I held Emma, who was shaking so hard I thought she might throw up. And Jake locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out for 2 hours. She promised she'd call every week and visit when she got settled and that she loved them more than anything. But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she'd already checked out. Sarah drove off toward California, where Jessica had moved a few months earlier, and I was left standing in that beach cottage parking lot with 2 traumatized kids who kept asking when mommy was coming back. The first few weeks were absolute hell. Emma stopped eating properly, and Jake started having nightmares where he'd wake up screaming for his mom, and I had no idea what to tell them because I didn't understand it myself. Sarah did call a few times in the beginning, usually late at night and clearly drunk, rambling about how free she felt and how she knew she'd made the right choice, but she missed them. Those calls destroyed the kids every single time because she'd make promises about visiting for their birthdays or Christmas, and then we'd never hear from her again for months. After about 6 months of this pattern, I realized the calls were doing more harm than good. So I changed our number and told the kids that mommy was on her journey and we needed to give her space. I didn't block her on email because I figured she should have some way to reach us for emergencies. But the emails were sporadic and always about her, never asking real questions about the kids' lives. I filed for divorce about 8 months after she left citing abandonment, and she didn't even respond to the papers or show up to court. Looking back now, I can see that was the moment I became a single father in every sense of the word, legally divorced, and completely alone in raising two heartbroken children who didn't understand why they weren't enough to make their mother stay. 3 years after Sarah left, I met Lisa at a parent-teacher conference for Emma's second-grade class. And I'm not going to lie and say it was love at first sight or some romantic movie moment. It was me showing up 20 minutes late covered in grease because I'd been finishing up a break job and forgot to change my shirt. Lisa was Emma's teacher and she'd asked to meet with me because Emma had been having some behavioral issues. Nothing major, but she'd been withdrawing during group activities and sometimes refused to participate in things that involved mothers like the Mother's Day card project. I sat there in that tiny classroom chair feeling like the world's biggest failure, while Lisa explained in this calm voice that Emma was struggling with maternal figures and needed consistency. And instead of judging me or making me feel worse, she asked what she could do to help. That conversation turned into occasional check-ins about Emma's progress, which turned into Lisa offering to tutor Emma in reading after school twice a week. And somewhere in there I realized I was looking forward to those brief conversations more than I wanted to admit. Lisa never pushed for anything more than friendship, and she never once made the kids feel uncomfortable or tried to replace their mother. She was just present in this quiet, steady way that my life had been missing for years. We started dating officially about 6 months after that first conference, but we kept it low-key and didn't introduce her as my girlfriend to the kids for another 4 months after that, because I needed to be absolutely sure this was real and stable. The first time Lisa came over for dinner, as more than just Emma's teacher, Jake was 9 and suspicious of every woman who got close to us. He barely spoke to her and spent the whole meal watching her like she might disappear at any moment. Emma was 7 by then and cautiously excited but also terrified. I could see it in how she'd start to warm up to Lisa, then suddenly pull back like she was remembering what happened last time she trusted a mom figure. Lisa handled it perfectly though. She never tried too hard or made grand gestures. She just showed up consistently week after week and proved through actions that she wasn't going anywhere. She came to Jake's basketball games and helped Emma with her science fair project and learned to make the specific brand of mac and cheese the kids liked. And slowly over the course of a year, they started to trust her. Meanwhile, Sarah had completely vanished from our lives. No emails for almost 2 years and no child support payments ever. I tried reaching out a few times through her sister to at least get her to sign off on legal stuff, but she'd apparently moved 3 times and changed her phone number twice. My lawyer told me that given the abandonment and complete lack of contact, we had grounds for termination of parental rights if we wanted to pursue it, but I wasn't sure if that was the right move until Lisa and I started talking seriously about marriage. We got engaged when Jake was 11 and Emma was 9, and that's when I sat both kids down and explained that Lisa wanted to adopt them if they were okay with that, which meant she'd legally be their mom in every way. Jake's response was immediate. He said, "She's already more of a mom than Sarah ever was," and Emma just climbed into Lisa's lap and stayed there for an hour. The adoption process took almost a year because we had to prove we'd made reasonable efforts to contact Sarah and give her a chance to contest it. My lawyer tracked her down in Oregon, where she was apparently living in some intentional community, and served her the papers. She never responded, didn't show up to any of the hearings, didn't contest anything. She just let her parental rights be terminated without a single fight. The day the adoption was finalized was one of the best days of my life. We had a small celebration at home with cake and the kids' favorite pizza, and that night Emma called Lisa mom for the first time without any prompting or hesitation. Jake had started doing it a few months earlier, but Emma had been holding back like she was afraid of betraying Sarah. So hearing her say it felt like watching her finally let go of that last bit of trauma. Lisa cried happy tears, and I realized that my kids finally had the stable, loving home they deserved. We got married 3 months later in a small ceremony in our backyard, with just close family and the kids as our wedding party. Life was genuinely good for the next few years. Jake made the varsity basketball team as a freshman, and Emma discovered she loved theater and got the lead in her middle school musical, and Lisa was there for all of it in ways Sarah never had been even when she lived with us. Then 9 years after Sarah walked out of that beach cottage, she showed up at our front door on a random afternoon in October looking older and tired and desperate. I opened the door expecting a delivery and instead found my ex-wife standing there with tears in her eyes saying she'd made the biggest mistake of her life and wanted to be part of the kids' lives again. My first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but she started talking fast about how she'd been in therapy for 2 years and realized she'd been running from herself, how she thought about Jake and Emma every single day and couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she wanted a chance to at least explain herself to them and maybe slowly build some kind of relationship. I told her she couldn't just show up after 9 years and expect to walk back into their lives like nothing happened, that they had a mom now who'd actually been there for them. But Sarah kept insisting that she was still their biological mother, and that mattered. Against my better judgment, and after talking with Lisa, who was surprisingly open to the idea of supervised contact, I agreed to let Sarah meet with the kids one time in our living room with both of us present. Jake was 15 by then, and Emma was 13. And when I told them their birth mother wanted to see them, Jake's face went completely blank, and he said no, and flat out refused. Emma was more conflicted. I could see her struggling between curiosity and fear. But ultimately she agreed to one meeting just to hear what Sarah had to say. The meeting was a disaster from the moment Sarah walked in. She tried to hug Emma, who immediately stepped back behind Lisa, and she attempted to make small talk with Jake, who sat on the couch with his arms crossed and wouldn't even look at her. Sarah launched into this prepared speech about her journey and her healing and how she understood now that she'd been selfish, but everything she said was still centered on her own feelings and growth rather than acknowledging the damage she'd caused. Emma sat there quietly crying while Sarah talked, and finally Jake cut her off and said, "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and act like you care now. We have a mom, and you're not her." Sarah's face crumpled, and she tried to argue that she'd always be their real mother no matter what, that biology mattered, that she'd been sick and needed help. Lisa spoke up then in her teacher voice, calm but firm, and said that the kids didn't owe Sarah anything, and this meeting was over if they wanted it to be. Emma nodded and ran upstairs to her room, and Jake followed without another word, leaving me and Lisa to deal with Sarah, who was now sobbing and saying we'd turned her children against her. I told her that she'd done that all by herself 9 years ago and she needed to leave, but Sarah wasn't done. She said she'd been talking to a lawyer and she had rights as their biological mother even if she'd been absent. Before she left that day, Sarah wrote down her phone number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand, saying the kids should be able to reach her if they ever wanted to. And I took it even though every part of me wanted to throw it away. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Sarah's thread about lawyers turned out to be mostly empty because no attorney in their right mind would take a case where a mother voluntarily abandoned her kids for 9 years and had her rights legally terminated without contest. But that didn't stop her from trying to force her way back into their lives through other means. She started calling my phone constantly, leaving long voicemails about how she deserved a second chance and how the kids needed to know their real mother. And when I blocked her number, she somehow got Lisa's cell and started the same routine there. Lisa was patient at first and tried to be compassionate because she understood that mental illness and trauma were real things. But after the 5th voicemail in one day where Sarah was crying and saying, "I can't heal until they forgive me. Don't you understand this is destroying my mental health?" Lisa blocked her too. The thing that made me reconsider my hard line against any contact was Emma, who came to me one night about 2 weeks after that first disastrous meeting and said she thought maybe she should try talking to Sarah one more time. I asked her why, and she said she'd been having dreams about her birth mother and felt guilty that maybe she'd been too harsh, and I recognized that guilt because I'd seen it in her for years, this feeling that somehow she was responsible for Sarah leaving. I talked to Lisa about it, and we agreed that Emma could have supervised phone contact with Sarah if that's what she really wanted, but Jake wanted absolutely nothing to do with it, and we respected that boundary. The phone calls started happening once a week on evenings, always on speaker in our kitchen with me or Lisa present. And at first they were awkward but relatively harmless, with Sarah asking about school and Emma giving short answers. But gradually Sarah started pushing boundaries. She'd make comments about how she wished she could take Emma shopping for clothes or help her pick out a dress for the school dance, inserting herself into milestones she had no right to anymore. Emma would get off these calls looking drained and anxious, and I started noticing she was biting her nails again, which was a stress habit she'd broken years ago. After about 2 months of weekly calls, Sarah asked if she could meet Emma in person for coffee, just the two of them, and Emma actually seemed open to the idea until Jake overheard us discussing it and absolutely lost it. He said we were being idiots if we trusted Sarah alone with Emma after everything she'd done, and that Emma was just feeling guilty and pressured but didn't actually want a relationship with someone who'd abandoned her. That fight ended with Jake slamming his bedroom door and not speaking to any of us for 2 days, and it made me realize how much this situation was affecting our entire family dynamic. I told Sarah through email that in-person meetings weren't happening yet, and we needed to slow down, but she responded with this long message about how I was being controlling and keeping her from her daughter, and how she'd done the work in therapy and deserved to be trusted. Then about a week later, I got a call from Emma's school counselor saying there'd been an incident that afternoon where a woman claiming to be Emma's biological mother had shown up during dismissal time and tried to approach her in the parking lot. The school security had intervened because Sarah wasn't on the approved pickup list, and Emma had started crying and called Lisa, who'd arrived within 10 minutes to take her home. I left work immediately, and when I got home, Emma was in her room with the door locked, and Lisa told me that Emma was terrified and kept saying she didn't feel safe. Sarah had apparently told the security guard that she had every right to see her daughter and called Lisa an imposter, making a scene in front of Emma's classmates and teachers. I was furious in a way I hadn't been even when she first left, because abandoning your kids is one thing, but coming back and traumatizing them all over again is something else entirely. I called my lawyer that same day and started the process for a restraining order, documenting every voicemail, email, and now this school incident. Sarah's response to being served with the restraining order was a series of increasingly unhinged emails accusing me of parental alienation and threatening to go to the media with her story about how I'd stolen her children. My lawyer assured me that her threats were baseless and the restraining order would hold up easily given the pattern of harassment and the school incident. But it didn't make me feel any better because I could see what this was doing to Emma, who blamed herself for trying to give Sarah a chance. Jake's response was to become fiercely protective of his sister. He started walking her to all her classes and waiting outside when she had rehearsal, and the first time I saw him do it, I realized he'd been carrying the weight of protecting her since he was 6 years old. The restraining order was granted, and I thought that would be the end of it, that Sarah would finally back off and maybe get the help she actually needed. But 2 weeks later, Emma came to me and said she wanted to call Sarah one last time to get closure. She said she'd been talking to her school counselor about it and felt like she needed to tell Sarah directly how her actions had affected her, and that she couldn't move forward without saying her piece. Lisa and I were hesitant, but Emma was 13 and mature enough to articulate what she needed, and my lawyer confirmed the restraining order prevented Sarah from contacting us, but didn't prohibit supervised contact if we initiated it. So we agreed to supervise one final call with the understanding that it would be the absolute last contact. Emma dialed the number Sarah had given us on speaker with all three of us in the room, and when Sarah answered, you could hear the desperation in her voice, saying, "Emma, baby, I'm so sorry about the school. I just wanted to see you." Emma took a deep breath and said in this steady voice that she'd spent years wondering what was wrong with her that made her mom leave, and that she'd finally realized nothing was wrong with her, that Sarah had made a choice. She told Sarah that Lisa was her real mom now, the one who'd been there for every hard moment and every achievement, and that she didn't want any more contact because it hurt too much. Sarah started crying and trying to interrupt, but Emma kept going, saying she hoped Sarah would get better, but that she couldn't be the one to fix her. When Emma hung up, she collapsed into Lisa's arms and sobbed. But it was a different kind of crying than before, like something had been released. We all thought that was truly the end of it until 3 days later when I got a call from a hospital in Portland saying Sarah had been admitted after a suicide attempt and had listed me as her emergency contact. The nurse said Sarah was stable but asking to speak with me, and I felt this wave of guilt and anger and exhaustion all at once because even now Sarah was making her pain everyone else's problem. I didn't go to the hospital and I didn't take her calls. Instead, I reached out to Sarah's sister, who I'd stayed in touch with over the years, and explained the situation. She hadn't spoken to Sarah in years either, but agreed to go be with her and help coordinate whatever care she needed. My therapist, who I'd started seeing about 2 months after Sarah reappeared in our lives, told me that I couldn't save Sarah and that protecting my children had to come first, and logically I knew that was true, but emotionally I still felt like somehow I'd failed. The last update I got was from Sarah's sister saying Sarah had been moved to a psychiatric facility for intensive treatment and that she'd make sure Sarah got the help she needed without involving us anymore. Jake and Emma both know what happened because I've always believed in age-appropriate honesty, and Emma cried, but also said she didn't want to feel responsible for Sarah's choices anymore. It's been 4 months since all of that went down, and our life has slowly returned to normal. Emma is back to her happy self and just got cast in another show, and Jake is looking at colleges with basketball programs. Sometimes I wonder if I handled everything wrong. If there was some way I could have helped Sarah reconnect without it turning into chaos. But then I watch Lisa helping Emma run lines for her play or cheering at Jake's games, and I know I made the right choice. My kids are happy and healthy, and they have a mother who chose them every single day. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. I don't know if you can ever truly escape the consequences of your choices, but I do know that my children shouldn't have to pay for Sarah's mistakes twice, and they won't. Not as long as I'm here to protect them. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.